Greetings Altered players, my name is Rare Cuisine, and in today's video we will be discussing a few cards that I think are worth experimenting with before the release of Trial by Frost. Beyond the Gates has been out for a few months now, and despite the amount of options this game has to offer, I believe there's still more out there to explore. So for each faction, I've come up with a few cards that I think are worth giving a shot before the next set releases, and these cards become entirely overlooked. These cards will all be rares, which I understand are pretty tight right now, but what do you have to lose from trying something new, right? I tried to get a character, a spell, and a permanent for each faction, but some factions may be seriously lacking one of these, so I may not have one for each faction, but I will have at least 3 cards for each. So let's get started with the first faction, Axiom. But before we get started, please leave a like on the video. A character from Axiom I think is worth exploring is Muna Druid. It has decent stats, rivaling Baba Yaga from hand despite not drawing a card. However, in exchange, it can provide some value in different ways by using its support ability to anchor a character. While factions like Muna and Lara have the most access to anchor and overall better characters to anchor, the anchor status is very powerful regardless. Axiom also has several ways to get Muna Druid directly into reserve, allowing direct access to its support ability, as well as a decent stat character when played from reserve. Some targets that Axiom wants to anchor are perhaps uniques that gain effects when a token is created, or maybe a character with a lot of boosts like Anansi or a Haven boost to Amelia. Trace also appreciates using this to gain a scrap counter without using any mana, and with Haven he's got amazing stats. A spell that I think worth trying is the Rare Hooked. Now I have seen some players use this before and maybe this has been tested already, but I've been really enjoying this, so I want to suggest it to anyone who's looking to try something new. The Common Hooked is already a powerful card, affecting the expedition results for an amazing 1 mana while not having fleeting, so it's easy to overlook the rare version. However, where the rare shines is obviously the gold text on the card, allowing you to draw a card. Bringing it all together, the rare version draws 2 cards and affects the expedition results twice for 4 mana and 2 actions, which is incredible value compared to anything else in the game right now. When this ends up directly into your reserve, this is strictly better than the Common Hooked if you aren't running any effects that return it from your reserve to your hand. But it's a great late game refuel in my Trace deck that I'm usually always happy to see. Honorable mention is Harvest. I've never used it, but I have a friend that does, and this is like a magical training in Axiom. It's quite effective. As for a permanent, in my opinion, all of them have kind of been explored already due to Axiom's permanent synergies, and I can't find a spot for anything new in existing builds. I can't really suggest Colonic Generator since it does nothing the turn it comes out, outside of Sierra, and while the card draw effect is strong, it gets you behind even more on tempo utilizing it. So while I know players are already using it, I would suggest trying Ouroboros and Keon Cylinder if you haven't yet. Ouroboros makes the resupplying you're already doing twice as strong, and even allows you to dodge effects that tax your resupplying. Keon Cylinder makes for a great after you and allows for stronger characters over the course of the game for a small 1 mana investment. Next up is Bravos with the Hatter. Just like Muna Druid, the Hatter has the anchor support ability which allows you to get a lot of value out of your boosted characters. You can get it directly into reserve via resupply or uniques with the hand to reserve costs. The stats from hand aren't bad either. He really is good in the forest mountain biome, and the 4 hand cost lets him dodge off you go. This one requires a bit of setup and takes rare slots, which is why it isn't obviously an auto include, but I think this one could be a lot of fun. A Bravo spell I think is a bit underrated is Helping Hand. The common version is already strong and does what it needs to do and doesn't have fleeting, but I think the rare fulfills a different purpose. Just like the Hatter, I think this card is amazing when it ends up in reserve. Playing this from reserve gives this card more value than playing it from hand since it has fleeting, and it has a 1 reserve cost compared to the common due to this. Helping Hand ends up overflowing a bit anyways, and this one won't. This card also puts out 2/2/2 worth of stats on the board for 1 mana, which in my opinion is the best you can get. In a deck of seasoned characters, I think the rare Helping Hand is a good inclusion. For a Bravos landmark, consider the Spindle Muna Bastion. We all know how polarizing this is in Muna and how it can swing the matchup in their favor. It's no different for Bravos, the only difference is the rare slot it takes up. This is going to be a bold claim, but I think this card can make Bravos a lot more formidable than it is now. Bravos characters are very strong, the only problem is that they're so susceptible to removal. So this could probably swing that in your favor, making your character is a lot more resilient to the easy removal like Off You Go and Acapella Training. For Lyra, consider Alice. I would only consider this as a one-of in any deck that would use Cernunnos. Alice, compared to Cernunnos, trades 2 stat points for the After You support ability. These stat points are valuable, so I wouldn't suggest using her over Cernunnos entirely, but the After You ability is clutch. So maybe instead of using 3 Cernunnos, just use 2 Cernunnos and 1 Alice. A spell to consider for Lyra is Spycraft. Already very good in Izmir, I think this card does have a place in certain Lyra decks, especially ones that can utilize the reserve. Fleeting spells get way more value when used from reserve, and it's not difficult to get Spycraft into your reserve. Being able to impact the game state without committing a character to reserve, like Tanuki or Tinkerbell, is strong in a control-ish faction like Lyra. I can't really suggest any permanents for Lyra right now. In a faction with a lot of 0 stats and can't afford to get behind in tempo, it's near impossible to find a good time to drop something like Aether Shard. The card advantage it grants you is unlikely to help you recover from the 2-0 you take from playing it. I'm sure there's a lot of fun to be had with Lyra Festival and cool Dr. Frankenstein uniques, but at that point you might as well just be playing a full-on festival deck. So I will suggest Lyra Navigator right now. I have used this card to a bit of success in helping me get over my water weakness, and if it can't help you, then the support ability is there. Tomoe Gozen is another overlooked card in my opinion. Obviously you can't play it until day 4, but the stats are amazing and it would be quite unexpected from a Lyra deck. For Muna, I suggest Axiom Scrambler. Players combat Muna as if it doesn't have access to Sabotage when it does. This is the only card that can Sabotage, but it still exists. It's a bit expensive with the 4 mana cost from hand, but assuming you're using Taja, the stats are respectable from hand and strong from reserve. A well-timed, unexpected Sabotage can be devastating from Muna. Check out my Muna control deck here, and I will leave a link to some gameplay of the Muna control deck from another creator in the sidebar. I don't think a Muna control deck is necessary to use this card, however, one of Tech Den can swing a game in your favor. I have 2 Muna spells to suggest today, Harvest and Acapella Training. The rare Harvest is more suited to a specialized build like Argent or Festival, but I suggest the common version for a standard Muna deck. It works well as an After You and can help increase your resources. Acapella Training also makes for a good After You that will show up the amount of resources between you and your opponent. It just takes a rare slot. Muna cards are designed with granting your opponent resources in mind, so if you use these cards to improve your card advantage while abandoning the ones that grant your opponent resources, you can put yourself in an advantageous position. The last Muna card I want to suggest is Monolith Ortis Bastion. Not only does this make all of your characters better than your opponent's characters of the same mana cost, it enables effects that require a boost a lot easier. This card was a boogeyman in Ortis decks early in the Beyond the Gates release, and Muna, in my opinion, gets even more value from this card due to its heavy anchor synergy. I know that it just copied the text from the rare in faction Ortis Bastion, but it makes me wonder if Muna will get tokens in the future. Pretty easy to slot in some sort of seedling mechanic one day. Ortis is in such a good spot right now. Despite the Sigismar deck being arguably solved right now, there are a lot of cards that still have potential that aren't mainstream. The first is Amelia Earhart. I guess I am kind of reaching with this one since Ortis has such good characters, but I don't think this card is objectively bad. It has vanilla stats from hand, which Ortis doesn't really want for 3 mana since they have access to Alchemist and Haven Warrior. However, from reserve, it's a 2/2 for 1 mana, which is my favorite thing right now. Altered is meant to be a game where everyone's deck is unique, so if you happen to have uniques that require putting a card from your hand into reserve, then I believe that this card may be worth including in your deck. I was going to suggest Ortis Attorney, but this one's already been figured out to be really effective. I have 2 Ortis spells to suggest today. The first is Gift of Self. It's arguably easier for Ortis to fulfill the condition than Izmir, and in a character-based deck, it's good to take a moment to increase your resources. Once again, this is another card that's good to put in reserve from hand. The second is Nurture. This one's a bit of a stretch, but I think it could be a decent card if you run Ortis Carrier. You can think of this like using a charge as an After You, and since this doesn't gain fleeting, you aren't going down on card advantage. This has a slight advantage over the rare Sarge since it only costs 1 from reserve. This card from reserve is a 2/2 for 1 mana, which I think highly of, like I've said previously. And this is yet another great card when you have uniques that need a card from hand to reserve. For permanents, I have two. Permanents are falling out of favor with Sigismar, so it's tough to suggest these, but they could still put out good results if used properly. The first is Brassbug Hive. I like that it has a 2 mana cost, allowing you to bring it out on turn 1 and still drop an Orders Trooper or Foundry Mechanic. It also does the thing I really like and gives you 2/2 of stats for 1 mana. The problem is, you have to commit the mana early and you only get 3 uses out of this as well. I think this one really shines in Gold Rank too. Last up is Armored Jammer. This is a simple 2 mana sabotage. Character based deck using cards to shake up the card parity is always nice. You're unlikely to trigger its other ability when it leaves play, but who knows, maybe you have a unique that can discard permanents and you're against a deck that doesn't use them. These two landmarks are the cheapest you can find in Orders right now, so maybe it's worth the addition of one of these if you have a unique that needs a permanent or landmark to work. I really struggled finding underutilized Izmir cards. This faction seems pretty solved, with Afanis dominating the usage percentage over Akesha and Lindway. Afanis' ability is pretty linear, so you wouldn't want to use the best and most efficient characters and spells with him. Not much room for creativity there, unfortunately. Also, I'm going to be honest with y'all, I do not have enough experience with Lindway to suggest anything the deck can take advantage of. So I guess this will be for Akesha? I don't know. Anyways, the first suggestion is Monolithic Gate. This card kind of does everything you want it to do. You're either going to be advancing in your expedition or sniping a card from your opponent. There are some fringe cases where you both move in the expedition, but you still move, so it's fine. Or your opponent can play around it to not lose any cards, but hopefully with good after you usage that won't happen. The next is Studious Disciple. The common version is pretty effective already, but the rare can essentially get you a character in the expedition for 0 mana. You need a spell in hand to get the most value out of it, but that's pretty likely in an Izmir deck. The last are Lyra Scald and Lady of the Lake. Lady snuck in here last minute, so I'm not sure if its effectiveness, but exchanging it from reserve to get an additional use out of a spell seems interesting. I could see this kind of support ability becoming a lot stronger as more spells release, but right now I don't see this being worth including to reuse Spycraft and Banishing Gate when you could just use the rare version of those if you really wanted to. Lyra Scald allows you to turn cards that you never play from reserve like Conjuring Seal or an oddly placed Beauty Sleep into another card. I do wish it would let you draw instead of resupply, but it's still nice to be able to repurpose your cards. That's all I have for Izmir. I can't suggest any of the permanents for general use really. Orders Carrier has been proven to be too much of a tempo loss, and the spells they have are either already really good or really hard to use. The only underutilized spell with potential in my opinion is Rise of Bifrost, and that just seems unrealistic to expect it to have a positive result on your gameplay. Thanks to everyone who made it through the entire video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more Altered TCG content. See you in the next video.